Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Interpreting India. From geopolitical complexities to economic uncertainties, India faces critical challenges in its quest for a more prominent role on the world stage. This season, we at Carnegie India continue to bring voices from India and around the world to examine the role of technology, the economy, and international security in shaping India's future. My name is Adarsh Ranjan. I'm a research analyst in the Tech and Society program at Carnegie India. AI is fundamentally reshaping the nature of work, automating tasks, transforming job roles, and raising urgent questions about which skills will define employability in the years ahead. For India, a country whose economy was built on knowledge work and software services, the stakes are particularly high. Yet, while there's plenty of speculation about job losses and gains resulting from the integration of AI, there's far less clarity on what's already changing, how businesses are integrating AI, how roles are evolving, and what are the short to medium term outlooks looks like. Underlying all of this is the more fundamental issue of AI literacy. Because when individuals don't understand what AI can do, they can't fully leverage its opportunities or understand its risks or prepare for its disruptions. When organizations don't understand its limits, they adopt it poorly. And when policymakers don't understand it deeply enough, the frameworks that they build risk falling short. This becomes even more critical as we confront the ethical dimensions of AI, for privacy and deepfakes to copyright. These aren't just technical challenges, they're questions of understanding. So, in this conversation, we will try to bring the threads on AI, future of work, AI literacy, and ethics together to understand not just where we're headed, but how prepared we are really for what comes next. Joining us today to discuss these issues is Mr. Jaspreet Bindra, founder of AI and Beyond and the Tech Whisperer. Jaspreet has served as the Group Chief Digital Officer at Mahindra Group, as a Regional Director at Microsoft India, and as a General Manager in the Tata Group as part of the Select Tata Administrative Services. He was also a member of the founding team at Bazi.com, which later became eBay India. Jaspreet was recognized as the inaugural Digitalist of the Year by Mint and SAP. He's a visiting professor at Ashoka University and also an expert at Singularity University. He's the author of 2 books. The first, Tech Whisperer, was published in 2019 by Penguin Random House and demystifies emerging technologies such as AI and offers business leaders a practitioner's guide to digital transformation. His second book, Winning with AI, was published in 2025 by Juggernaut and makes the case that AI literacy is the essential skill of this era and gives individuals and organizations a practical path to building it. Jaspreet holds an MBA, is a chemical engineering, and has a master's in AI ethics and society from Cambridge University. Jaspreet, we're delighted to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Great, Adarsh. It's fantastic to be here. Look forward to the conversation.
Great. So I want to begin by talking about some of the work you've done on AI and the future of work. You've, in some of your writings, pointed out that there is significantly greater enthusiasm AI in India and China as compared to the West, where the discourse tends to be a bit more cautious. Is that difference actually translating into faster adoption on the ground? And what are the broad trends that you're seeing when it comes to how it's affecting the nature of work? And if you could comment, what do you think the short and medium term policy looks like globally, but also for India?
Sure, Adarsh. No, it's a great question, because I've always maintained that the single biggest early impact of specifically generative AI is going to be on how we work. And therefore, work will change as dramatically as it changed from, say, so-called blue-collar to white-collar work, where, with the advent of digital tools and softwares like the spreadsheets and Word documents, etc., the whole way that we used to do work collaboratively using machines, using computers, and thus completely changed the way, it used to happen before that, what was maybe clerical work. The same level of change will happen because of AI and it being a cognitive technology. And more of this change will be, generative AI change will be focused on white collar work. But as we go forward and physical AI comes in, with robotics, humanoids, etc. Perhaps we'll see something similar in blue collar, but I'll kind of focus on the white collar work at this point of time. You're also right that actually survey after survey shows that countries like India, China, and some of the other Asian countries, African countries are far more optimistic and enthusiastic about the advent of AI than, say, the European countries or even the US or Australia. In fact, Europe, Australia, US pretty much is at the bottom. And, in India, usually is at the top ahead of every other country, but definitely in the cluster of countries. And so we look at it much more optimistically. I've written and speculated about that. What could be the reasons around that? And well, one reason is, frankly, that we have a lot less to lose. The West has a lot to lose with a new disruptor coming in. Everything is set. They lead a good life. While in India, we grasp at anything new which can come and, lift up our station in life. And there are a few other reasons. A younger population, for example, the fact that we are much more used to using digital goods, public goods, digital public infrastructure. Every single person, I believe one of our 1.4 billion of us. So all of those lead to the fact that we are early adopters and therefore more optimistic. Now, whether is that translating into usage of AI in work is still an open question. Again, there are many surveys which state that AI adoption amongst a certain strata of population in India specifically is higher than at many places in the West. They're not authoritative surveys, and so I'm not sure how much of that is true. And whether Indians are using it more in their work, again, for a certain narrow segment, yes. So whether if they are knowledge workers, tech workers, IT workers, Indians seem to be on par or ahead in terms of adopting these tools. But I do still think that the vast majority of India is not even aware of AI tools, much less using it in their work. And remember, in India, a lot of the population is in non-cognitive areas of work, whether it be agriculture or construction, etc. And so, AI doesn't touch that yet. And so to summarize, I would say that Indians are definitely far more enthusiastic and optimistic about absorbing AI in their work and life. But the jury is still out on whether they have done so or not. For that, it'll take some more time.
You just touched upon it a little bit there when you said that knowledge tech workers are sort of the uptake is more, but you do a lot of work with different kinds of organizations. You've been doing a lot of digital transformation work for the past 7-8 years now. Are there specific sectors where you're seeing that the uptake is much higher? So I just wanted to sort of point out this research that Anthropic released, mapping which sectors' roles are most exposed to AI. And the research shows that theoretically, computer and mathematical roles, business and finance, programmers, customer service, data processing, these are the kind of roles that are most exposed to AI. But they also sort of know that there's a gap between the theory and the reality at the moment. But do you think that this is also mapping onto the Indian economy, or is there a difference here?
No, the Anthropic research, what the Anthropic research shows is reasonably relevant to India also. And so, coding, IT, software engineering is probably the single most quote unquote impacted and maximum usage of AI is happening. In fact, I would hardly know any good software engineers who do not use AI tools now. Those don't exist any longer. The other area is customer service, and that also has started seeing an uptake, much lesser than software engineering, but or tech, but still. A third area actually is a sector which is very interested in absorbing AI, but is hobbled by regulation at this point of time, is BFSI, banking, financial services, insurance. Again, a sector which would see a lot of impact by AI, but still the regulatory framework does not allow that. And finally, professional services or consulting is also an area which almost is facing an existentialist threat from AI, or if not a existentialist threat, at least a disruption in the way in the business model. There's also being very open to uh, to adopt or absorb AI in that sense. So I think that report, what it is saying, is still largely true. But I must again say that these are early days, as you rightly said. In the Anthropic report also there are gaps, but even if there are gaps, the actual seems to be tracking the theoretical. But I think the real changes will start happening once AI starts getting absorbed, or starts getting used much more in the educational area, for example. Okay, or in the educational system, governance or government, which is still oblivious to some of these new developments, or healthcare for that matter. Okay, or the legal area where it has started, but it's still there is some time for it to happen. Anecdotally, others I can state that, look, even after 3+ years of Chat GPT, as I go around in enterprises, while there is a lot of awareness of AI, the adoption of AI is still abysmally low. And so, in many ways, I say that, organizations have invested in AI and they've brought the horse to the water, but making the horse drink, okay, is still a big problem, and actually a area for my next book, as to how we make the horse drink. That is still not happening in scale the way we thought that it would happen.
I'll come back to that in a bit, but one of the things that happens when we talk about AI and the future of work is that there is a lot of speculation, and in some cases it's very alarming that the projections are that AI would necessarily lead to a lot of job losses and destruction of existing jobs. Right? And the IT sector is very sensitive. As you know, in India, the IT sector has been the backbone of the modern economy and the primary vehicle through which millions of people have entered the middle class. You see it a bit differently, and you've, I think, previously written that it's not so much job destruction as job transformation. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I can go on and on about AI and jobs, but let me focus on the IT sector, since that was kind of more your question. Look, just before I come to the IT sector, let us acknowledge the fact that AI will disrupt jobs. It will destroy certain jobs. It will create massive new jobs, as has every technology before AI. What this will mean is that there will be a great disruption, a rupture, whatever way you call it. Now, if I was to move specifically to the IT sector, it's kind of it's a bit ironical that the entire sector was created out of the last big disruption. Okay, and technology disruption on jobs. And the last big disruption, for people old enough to remember, was when computing came in. Computers, personal computers on everyone's desk, Microsoft and Apple and everyone bringing that. And if you remember that time, the fear of job loss was probably as great as the fear as is now, except that there was no social media to amplify that fear. Okay, but there were people out on the streets, railing against computers, calculators, etc. There were governments who were looking at policies, new policies to frame so as to protect jobs and protect livelihoods. What happened, Ray? Okay, certainly, the stenographers disappeared, and a bunch of other such jobs disappeared. But this entire IT sector, of which we are justifiably proud of, actually came because of that, and therefore created many more jobs, and many more fulfilling jobs, and many more higher paying jobs, than what used to exist at that point of time. And so I believe, therefore, that the way to framing it as job destruction is the wrong way to frame it. As a transformation is, and as to how jobs change, and therefore the skills needed for it change. Okay, and therefore the change that we have to do upon ourselves, and therefore my focus on AI literacy, which I'm sure we will come to. So, I would like to kind of end by a very nice statement that I read by someone in Sweden, I think a minister or a union worker, I've forgotten, in Sweden, who said that, look, we don't protect jobs, we protect workers. Okay, and that's not the same thing. Protecting jobs, frankly, is a is an exercise in futility. Okay, because those jobs are going to go away, new kind of jobs are going to come. But if the workers themselves reskill and re-equip themselves through AI literacy, etc., the same workers can take these newer roles or these newer jobs. And therefore, I think even as in India, we think about potential policy, etc., we should be thinking of protecting workers rather than protecting jobs.
I think that's a perfect segue to get into the sort of work that you've been doing the last couple of years, the thrust of which has been on AI literacy. You said that awareness is quite high in a lot of industries and across a lot of institutions, but adoption is not. And in the previous question, you spoke about that there is the skills needed for the AI era need to change. Do you think that in the AI policy debate, which tends to focus on things like data, things like compute, that literacy is a bit underappreciated? And from your own work, from the sort of boot camps and workshops that you conduct, what is your perception of how people think of AI literacy?
Sure. No, you're right. I've been working in AI for a long time, and obviously all these disruptions are happening. And people would ask me, okay, fine, it's going to change everything, but what do we do? What should we do? And frankly, I didn't have a good answer until I stumbled on the concept of AI literacy. Okay, and different words are used: AI fluency, AI expertise, AI upskilling. But I like the word literacy because it's different from training, it's different from upskilling, etc. As I'll explain. So, what is this literacy thing? So, I have what I call my 3 laws of AI literacy, and the first one states that, look, in this age of AI, with everything, all these new jobs, etc., coming in, roles coming in, everyone doesn't need to be an AI expert, but everyone needs to be AI literate. And that the definition of literacy itself will change from reading, writing, arithmetic to all of those, plus how you use AI in everything that you do, whether work or otherwise. And then frankly, the third one, that all the investments that you do as an enterprise, government, educational institution in AI tools, agents, software, etc., is not going to land unless your people are AI literate. And this has been borne out. Study after study. There was a famous MIT NAMDA study, which kind of said that 95% of generative AI startups don't scale. And one of the big reasons was that the people weren't ready to receive. They weren't literate enough. And literacy, Adarsh, is different from training. Training is where you go, you say, oh, open Copilot. On the left-hand side, there'll be this. You drop-down menu, you click on that. No, that makes it boring. Literacy is about knowing the grammar, the structure, articulation of a language. And once you become literate, you can read any novel. Say you become literate in English. You don't need to be trained in every novel. And so the whole way that you kind of have to look upon it. In fact, therefore, I believe as a corollary that the definition of AI talent itself will change. We think of AI talent as AI, ML engineers, ML ops, data scientists, etc. And those are great talent. But AI talent will be everyone with whatever job she or he is doing, using AI to do that job better. So a recruiter, for example, saying, oh, I can use Lovable or Emergent or one of these workflow tools to automate my workflow, my recruiting workflow. I don't need to go to the IT department. I can do it myself. That's literacy. In terms of the second part of your question, most organizations think of AI today as training. Okay, but we never got trained on the internet, for example. We became literate about it, became knowledgeable about it. And therefore, this effort to do boot camps across multiple places where in 4 or 5 hours, people get excited about stuff and start figuring out how to use multiple tools for their work, and how to use them the right way, how to use them safely in many ways. And finally, so therefore, AI and Beyond, my organization, talks about building AI literacy in organizations and beyond. And we got the opportunity to do the Beyond bit, with the government of India asking us to make a tech or a education video with the government certificate to make every Indian AI literate. So the UI AI for all, available on Khan Academy, Coursera, NASCOM, multiple other places. I believe has close to 500,000 people who have kind of registered for it. A bunch of them have taken it. And so I think literacy needs to be the bedrock. And I agree that we are measuring AI by the number of, startups or the amount of funding or the amount of NVIDIA chips bought. And all of those are very important things. But all of those are not going to land unless your people are AI literate.
Dig into this a little bit more. So you've said that it's not so much about the tools. It's not so much about understanding how to use ChatGPT, but rather understanding the underlying context of how sort of AI works. In your book, Winning with AI, you have, I think, a framework or a 5 sort of step process through which I think you try and break it down. Can you explain what that is and what are each of the elements within it?
So slight correction. No, I do believe it's about the tools. You need to understand the tools. It's not about a tool. Okay, training is about a tool. Okay, I have Copilot or I have Claude, and I'm going to train you how to use Claude for your work. And therefore, second is it's not just about using it for the work that you do in your organization. That's training, a tool to do how you work. Literacy is about how you use AI generally, across tools, across agents, across everything. And we believe that AI has, you need to develop 2 kinds of senses, as we've written in our book. One is called the direction sense, which is what is happening in AI, what is the new stuff happening, how can I keep up with it, how will it change my work, etc. And the second is execution sense, which is then actually how do you use the stuff out there to execute or to do your work better. Now, in this execution sense, we created and when I say we, it's because I've co-authored it with my and Beyond co-founder Anuj. We created like a 5-step framework, which goes from reads to writes to adds to thinks to does. And the why we created it was we made for one reason, to make it simple. If you want to become literate in anything, forget about AI. You have to learn to read, you have to learn to write, you have to learn to add, you have to learn to think, you have to learn how to do. And so we use the same thing, but we made it even simpler by making the reads thing like a abbreviation. So the R of reads means one skill, E of reads is another skill, A of reads is another skill, etc., etc. Okay, so the S of reads, for example, is summarizing, okay, using AI. And the reads part, therefore, is how do you get in information, absorb information by summarizing, etc. The writes part is how do you create stuff, okay, and that could be across text or video or whatever. Adds is about how do you analyze stuff using AI, okay, and the thinks is about how do you use AI as your second brain to brainstorm, to think of new things, okay, new ideas, new concepts. And finally, the does is how do you use agentic AI to actually make AI do stuff. Now, so that's the kind of framework. And as you climb the ladder, we believe that at the end of the 5th step, you'll be super literate in AI. Just to kind of add that, the book is a year old. And so AI moves super fast. And so some of that is dated already. And so in our new book, we are thinking of adding 2 or 3 more steps. Okay, the staircase becomes longer. And, there'll be things around making, there'll be things around drawing, there'll be things around orchestrating, for example, which is now with agentic AI specifically. Those are the new literacy skills that you need to develop.
In the sort of boot camps and workshops that you do, uh, bringing this framework and sort of teaching this to business executives, or even people who sort of uh, have a higher education degree is, I think, one thing. Do you think there's a challenge when you between say trying to teach it to a business executive versus if you try and teach this framework to a shopkeeper in rural Maharashtra, let's say?
So look, well, we've taught this to business executives. We've taught this to students. Okay, and through our video, probably shopkeepers. We don't know. Okay. So I have only limited knowledge of how it works. The first two constituencies I've taught to, the third one not yet, but I can speculate. So look, business executives, when we go there, we don't just give them the general framework that they can get from the book. Okay. In fact, our book has a little chatbot also built of it, grounded to the book, so people can just query also and get stuff from the book. Okay, but we actually very sharply customize that boot camp to that participant, that industry, that business, that function. Okay, so an HR person in a cement company will have a totally different boot camp than a fraud management division in a bank. Okay, because the jobs are different, and so we make it relevant. Students is a little different. Students, in fact, are obviously much faster. They're more AI native, than these executives are, and many of them are on this framework, are a similar framework. And there, we focus a lot more, for example, in Ashoka, in teaching how, and not just teaching them how they can build stuff using AI, vibe code, etc. And as you know, Ashoka, for example, is a liberal arts university, and we've had, and when I teach, the exam is actually what you build. It's not a theoretical thing. Humanities is what they build, and we've had some amazing things being built using vibe coding, using English to code, by humanities student, including a couple who have had almost 100% visual disability. And so, there's a lot of superpower there. Now, finally, shopkeepers, rickshawalas, etc., I have no idea. I've not directly taught them. But I think, given the fact that translation in AI is so easy, contextualization is also not very difficult, and using speech rather than the written word is also super simple. I think it lends itself to teaching to these constituency. In fact, to close, the video that I talked about, which we made for the government of India, is now being translated, or already has been translated, into 12 Indic languages by Sarva. Okay, they picked that video up to translate it, and so and that's what the Sarva guys told me. I'm not sure whether it's out yet or not, but yeah, therefore, hopefully that will reach that number of those kind of people.
Sounds great. I wanted to talk a little bit about the challenges. So you alluded to this earlier, that the enthusiasm is there, but the awareness is there, but the adoption isn't. And we're some ways away from sort of mass AI literacy. What do you think is the biggest barrier to that?
Well, so I think for so if I talk about narrow constituency, which is the corporates and people who are educated, well off, etc., it's much more psychological. Okay, it's a lot to do with, I've seen that, look, I mean, they just get overwhelmed with the hype. They get overwhelmed with just the sheer number of things happening, and are unable to wrap their hands around it. And a lot of it, therefore, is psychological. They're not gotten into it. Some part of it is cost. Most people use free tools, and when they use free tools, they find that there's a lot of hallucination happening. They're not being able to use a bunch of features, and then unwilling to invest in in whatever. So it's a cost in some sense. But I think the biggest one is really the fear. Okay, and there is fear because as we all know, bad news travels faster than good news. And so, they keep on reading about the deepfake creation, about the fact that their data will go out completely to the void. And therefore, the AI companies will know everything about them. There's fear of environmental degradation, real fears, okay, which prevent them from adopting it. But if I talk of India at large, Bharat, India at large, 1.4 billion people, I think frankly, people just don't even know that it exists. Okay. A overwhelming majority, again, there are no real numbers, but I would sense that greater than 80 to 90%, maybe greater than 80% of people in India don't even know. And there's an opportunity, frankly, Adarsh, that look, 1.4 billion people use digital goods without knowing it's digital, or it's called this, or it's called that. So I think there's a great opportunity to bring generative AI to 1.4 billion people, the same way as digital was brought to 1.4 through applications, and treating it as a digital public good, and through the devices that they own. And then we will see an adoption, similar to the kind of adoption we saw in the great Indian digital transformation. It's a concept which I sometimes call Jan AI. I write about it. So it's Gen AI, Jan AI, okay, AI for the Janta. And a lot of people, including in the government and the institutions, are working towards it. So I hope that happens.
Apart from, people who are doing a lot of work towards building up the skills, the government is obviously also very invested in ensuring that upskilling happens and that people have the necessary skills to really make use of the AI era. The government recently has created some new initiatives to drive AI skilling. Budget 2026 proposed 15,000 AI labs in schools and 10,000 tech fellowships at IITs. What do you make of sort of these initiatives? Are these interventions, do you think, enough? And what more do you think needs to happen from a policy perspective?
I'm not an expert in this in many ways, and I don't follow exactly what the governments are doing. But I think a few things are very important and being done right. Okay, so for example, in most of the curricula, school curriculums have changed a lot. And, in the CBSE, for example, AI is now a separate subject. It's not just, something which, you also teach. There's a separate exam. I'm also led to believe that introduction to AI, etc., is being introduced at fairly junior levels, in the lower and the middle schools itself. And so I think that's also a good thing, because I think in educating people about it through the school system or the educational system is probably the single biggest area of good that you can do. I think, therefore, investing in that as well as in higher education is a great thing. But I think AI is too big, our population is too big. And a couple other things I believe perhaps need to be done. I personally believe, others, that AI is big enough, important enough to be treated as a national mission. Okay. However strong we are, or our intentions are, we're still not treating it at that level as a national mission. To give you an example, population control was treated as a national mission, okay, or the Green Revolution before that, or even reducing smoking, for example, okay, was treated at a much more fundamental level. And think about it, all of those have worked. Okay, the more recent one I can think of, obviously, is the Digital Public Infrastructure Pact. It was a national mission, and that also worked. Okay, and so I think if the government elevates it to that and treats it as that, and therefore then it becomes far more holistic. Okay, it's just not limited to IIT thing or somewhere, because the opportunity of 1.4 billion, 1.5 billion AI enabled people is massive and can help us realize our 2047 or developed country ambitions, leapfrog into that much, much faster. While DPI is free for multiple people, for everyone, the amount of value it has created, in terms of reduction of friction, in terms of subsidy, distribution, in terms of entrepreneurship, in terms of global investments into India, etc., is immeasurable. And I think the same and more can happen with AI if it is treated at that level. And so that's my wish.
So, I mean, talent is one of the sort of legs of the India AI mission, one of the 7 pillars. So, I think that the government is responding to some of what you're saying as well.
Absolutely.
I think I quickly want to touch a little bit upon one more element, which is AI and ethics. You hold a master's from Cambridge in AI ethics and society. I want to look at 2 issues, which is one is deepfake and the other is the issue of copyright. Right? So some of the harms of deepfakes are now well documented. Everything that happened with X recently, and in general, deepfake videos of politicians, etc., being circulated, and even in sort of war and battlefield scenarios when AI deepfakes are being created. And when it comes to the issue of copyright, we have sort of 2 parallel issues. One is that in many cases, the training data that is being used by LLMs, the artists and the writers whose work it is being trained upon, they're not necessarily being compensated for it. And the second is that AI generated art writing that is, demonstrably sort of inspired or derivative of a specific artist's body of work, again, without their sort of acknowledgement or compensation, work is being built upon that when you can see that there's a sort of clear inspiration from it. Do you think that genuine AI literacy would have an impact on either of these issues? And how do you think that could influence it?
Sure. So look, this is a vast subject. I spent 2 years in Cambridge doing this and other things, and I can spend 2 years more telling you about that. But so I'll try and keep it as abbreviated as possible. So look, first of all, ethics in AI is a real concern. Ethics in every technology has been a concern. Every powerful general purpose technology is dual in nature. And, while there are all the good things, there are all the destructive things also, as we have seen in technology after technology. In some sense, let me go back to the first question that you asked, where Indians are the most optimistic about AI. Similar surveys or same surveys also reveal that Indians have the least concern about AI ethics. Okay, in fact, they don't care in many ways. And part of that is economic, part of that is cultural. And I delved a lot into the cultural part, especially vis-a-vis privacy in my Cambridge work. And in fact, the fact that we care less about ethics perversely has made DPI, DPG successful. It would be very difficult to do that and other countries have tried that, but it's very difficult to do. And so keep that in the back of your mind as we talk about deepfakes and about copyright. So again, deepfakes and copyright are real problems, okay, in AI. Different problems, but real problems vis-a-vis ethics of AI. So let me just take each one quickly. Deepfakes, in my mind, is a known problem, is a known evil. Okay, it is something which no one agrees is good. No one says is good. Everyone agrees is bad. And look, I'm not going to get into what are deepfakes and what do they do. I think we know all that. 2 things I will say here. One is that the effect of deepfakes is sometimes not as great as we think it is. Okay, for example, in the last general elections, okay, there were a volley of deepfakes in India. But multiple surveys done after that actually revealed that it didn't really change voters' minds the way it was being made out to be. Okay, because human beings are very good at judgment. We sometimes underestimate that. It's how we judge other people, and therefore we can judge, deepfakes. So I'm not saying we shouldn't worry about them, etc. But it's not so far, at least. It's not as huge. Because they are not so convincing so far, or humans have judgment. There are multiple. Having said that, we definitely need very strong regulation, education, and awareness around and technology-based solutions to deepfakes. All 3 are necessary. Like tech-based solutions, education, much like the smoking kills kind of a program, or and regulation. And I don't think we have either right. Okay. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but regulation wise, I believe that it's the Copyright Act which is used to punish deepfakes. Okay. If so, we need something much, much, much strong. And I've always advocated that rather than trying to create this omnibus law around AI, which tries to capture everything, which is never going to be possible. Let's at least pick up the known evils, deepfakes, for example, and create exemplary regulation around that, which does not exist. Similarly, education, not to that level. Technology will always be a catch-up game. We will build technology to detect, and someone will build a better deepfake and a better technology, better deepfake. So that's about deepfakes. About copyright, it's a different problem, but also a real problem. I mean, deepfakes is more a societal problem in many ways. Copyright is also an economic problem, right? About people's output, economic output in form of content, etc., being, plagiarized and being used by. Again, there are two views, and the majority view obviously is that people are going to lose their livelihoods, etc., etc. There are multiple cases out there right now in courts, big courts of the world. We're going to get precedents around this, okay, about whether using someone's, New York Times, whatever. But I think two things are going to happen. One is that, frankly, technology is going to win, quote unquote. You're not going to stop it. And secondly, I think big companies, large AI labs will enter into revenue share agreements with big content creators, and so some of that will get better. But the counter philosophical argument is that, look, all human knowledge is built upon knowledge which is already created. And when you write a paper, a scientific or a research paper for your PhD dissertation, you write it on the shoulders of 100 papers which have already been been out there, existing. Sure, you cite it, and that's the big difference, okay, which AI does not cite. But now, in fact, some of the newer models, Perplexity's many models, for example, some models used in Google, you are actually seeing explicit citations, okay, back to the origin. And so I think that's how this will evolve in some way, kind of a halfway solution, which will not make either side happy, but will be better than what a totally one-sided thing that existed right now. But that's how I look at both of these.
No, thank you. That is that is very helpful to sort of contextualize that and look at how we might look at these issues in the future. I think we're at time, and I think that was also all the questions I had for you. Thank you so much for taking out the time to talk us through these issues and help us understand, what the future might contain. Yeah, thank you. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a new episode. To make sure you don't miss it, be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts from. To learn more about our research and the team, you can visit us at carnegieindia.org. You can also find us on social media on X, Facebook, and Instagram. Thank you for listening. See you next time.